Welcome to Uncle Bert's radio broadcast. This radio show was broadcast by the United States Department of Agriculture in 1926. Disclaimer: this is read from a historic archive document. Do not assume contents reflects current scientific knowledge, policies, or practices. This broadcast was aired 21st of April 1926.
Dear boys and girls of the Radio Garden Club, this is Uncle Bert, the garden expert of the United States Department of Agriculture, broadcasting the 8th of a series of garden talks to boys and girls. Last week in our broadcast to the boys and girls of the Radio Garden Club, we discussed the cultivation of the garden and explained some of the reasons why the soil of the garden should be cultivated. One of the most important reasons for cultivating the garden, as mentioned last week, is to loosen the soil so that the air can get to the roots of the plants. In a former broadcast, it was explained that plants must have food just like animals. Their food is in a different form, however. They do not take it in lumps and chunks, but in a solution which requires plenty of water in the soil. For this reason, it may be necessary, even in sections of the country where it rains at reasonably frequent intervals, to water the garden plants from time to time. Naturally, the first question the boys and girls ask is how the water should be applied to the garden. You must be very careful in using the hose, or more injury than good will result. Plants are a good deal like animals. They want to drink at regular intervals when they are thirsty, but do not want to be kept sprinkled and half drowned all the time. We spoke of drainage in a previous talk. The purpose of drainage is to take excess water from the soil, so in applying water, be careful not to create an excess of water in the soil. What is the safest rule to go by in watering a garden? The only rule that we can give is one based on common sense and good judgment. Apply water to the garden when the plants show the first indication of needing a drink. This is generally indicated by a slight wilting of some of the tender leaves. However, the gardener must learn to anticipate a little in this respect and water in advance of the wilting of the plants. What becomes of the water that falls on the soil in the form of rain or applied in watering? First, considerable of the water evaporates from the surface of the soil and is carried away by the wind. Some of it settles away into the earth or is held in reserve in the soil and returns to the surface by what is called capillary attraction. If you will take a lump of domino sugar and dip the corner of it into coffee, you will see just what is happening in the soil every day. The coffee will rise through the pores of the sugar until it reaches the upper portion. The action of the oil in the lamp wick is another good illustration. And the soil is just like the sugar or the lamp wick in that the moisture rises to the surface just as fast as that which is near the surface evaporates. How about the moisture taken up by plants? What becomes of it? That is another good question, because plants are constantly taking moisture into their system through the little hairs on their roots. This moisture is passed upward through the stem of the plant and finally reaches the leaves where the most of it evaporates or goes off into the air through the pores on the leaves of the plants. When the moisture content of the soil is low and the rootlets cannot get it fast enough and the evaporation from the leaves is going on rapidly, the supply of moisture in the leaves is reduced to the point where the leaves wilt or flag, as is commonly said. Thus, you will see that moisture in the soil plays an important part in the growth of the plants. And in fact, they cannot get their food and cannot grow unless they have the necessary amount of moisture. It has been suggested that the plants should not be sprinkled in a promiscuous manner. In fact, just a little water every day may be injurious. The correct method is to give the plants a thorough watering about once a week or at such intervals as they need it. If watered by a garden hose, it can be sprayed on, or better still, carried in little furrows made by a hoe along the side of the plants. Then, after the ground is soaked underneath, the dry soil on top can again be thrown into the furrow, and a day or two later, the ground cultivated to loosen or smooth the surface. In the irrigation sections, the watering is done either through furrows or by level flooding. The furrow method is again to be preferred because it leaves the ground in better condition. By having the rows rather short and watering by what the Western farmers call short heads and a quick flow, the plants can be given enough water to supply their needs, and at the same time, the soil is not oversaturated. Is it not better to supply the water like rain? Perhaps so for certain crops like celery, lettuce, spinach, cabbage, beets, and carrots, and those crops which make a quick growth, but not so for tomatoes, beans, and a few others of that kind. Recently, there have been developed some very elaborate systems of overhead watering, known as overhead irrigation or sprinkler irrigation. These are ideal for the grooving of celery and lettuce and the crops that I have mentioned. A short line or two of sprinkler pipe can very easily be installed in the garden. The pipes are drilled at intervals of every 2 or 3 feet, and little brass sprinklers inserted in the holes which spray the water for a distance of 20 to 40 feet in various directions, depending upon the pressure that is applied. For a small garden, 1 line of pipe will be sufficient. This can be mounted on stakes 3 or 4 feet in height, and the pipe attached to the water system by means of the garden hose. It is important to turn the pipes a trifle from time to time to change the streams of water and distribute it better to the crops. If the water is applied when a little wind is blowing, that helps to distribute it. What time of the day should the water be applied? That is another good question. The early morning is a good time, but the late evening is better. The water should not be applied during the middle of the day when the sun is hot. This applies especially to cases where the water is sprinkled over the plants, but where it is applied by means of furrows, it does not make so much difference. In any event, the dry earth should be drawn over the wet soil in the furrows to prevent baking. There is another form of irrigation that has not been mentioned, and that is sub-irrigation, or applying the water through underground pipes, usually drain tiles or sewer pipes. The joints are not cemented, and this permits the water to escape into the soil. These lines of pipes are laid on a dead level, 10 or 12 inches below the surface, so as to be out of the way of spading. The water is admitted at one end from the garden hose. The lines of pipes should be not more than 6 or 8 feet apart for best results. By this method, the surface soil remains dry all the time, and the plants get their water from underneath. A simple rule for watering the garden is, do not water until necessary, then give the plants a good wholesome drink. That is all for today for the boys and girls of the Garden Club. Your Uncle Bert has one more lesson to share with you this spring, so tune into our next lesson. Until then, always remember to giddy up and garden.
This production was researched and produced by BreakAway Empire LLC.